Welcome here to the 5th lecture on the Queen's Indian Defense from the Tropical Center in Hamburg, where the evil chess-based people are conspiring to take your money and get you addicted to chess. And to that they have hired nobodies like me. I'm not sure how this plan's going to work. Never mind, let's look at the most interesting variation for white, the G-tree system, which is by far the most popular out there. And black now has a various number of options. The old main line was, as I said in the introduction, a bit passive, just normal developing moves, and then after bishop d2, turns out that white is a little better. So I thought, sometimes about playing this, like knight a6 here is an interesting move, and you can play this, but to give it as a recommendation to someone else who might end up in a worse position just following your recommendation without any novelty being played or anything spectacular, I think that's a bit unfair. So therefore I'm suggesting you to play the system that I have played myself a few times. First of all, the big modern move, bishop a6. And the point is simple. It's not so easy to protect the pawn. White will have to somehow do something which is inconvenient to do so. And the most common way to do this is b3. It's also most natural. If white could put the bishop on b2, it would be a desirable move. So, as such, it's a structurally good move. Only now there's been some weakness on the dark squares. Normally this is used by giving a check when bishop d2 is the best move, and then the bishop returns to e7, and then the bishop is a bit away from the b2 square, and this is playable. This is the main line. It's played by Anand all the time with black, by most of the other players as well in the top. But it's also it's very heavy on theory. So I have chosen another system which I think is fully playable, but strategically it's more complex, and in practice it's been seen less. The main idea is bishop b7, now bishop g2. There's really no other good moves. And now comes the check again. And after bishop d2 comes c5. Should be said that here that a5, with the idea of playing d6 and knight bd7, is also a perfectly playable move. But the c5 system, it attracts me somehow, and also it seems to me that many players have great difficulty playing the white side of this system. Now white can do something immediately, or he can castle, and black will do nothing else than castle all the same. So this is the critical position which we'll look at in these two lectures, lecture 5 and lecture 6. In lecture 6 we'll look at bishop takes b4. So no more about this now, except that it's the best move. The main point here with this c5 is again that black has control over the d5 square. White cannot play d4, d5 without losing a pawn. So other moves have been tried, one of them being bishop c3, which is the main move besides taking on b4, and another one is slightly tame, d takes c5. Here bishop takes c5 is the most normal move, and let's say white's playing knight c3, which is a normal move. This kind of position is similar to a hedgehog position, but with some differences. The main difference being that white does not control the e4 square. He cannot easily play e4 and come into a traditional hedgehog position. Also, black has not yet played d6. He most likely will do so, but right now it's not necessary. Maybe he can play d5 at some point, and many times he will. In this position, the best move is knight e4. With this move, black takes control of the e4 square. So the strategy with c5 has given reasonable control over the dark squares, and our traditional bishop on b7 in the Queen's Indian has given us control over the e4 square. We haven't taken the advantage, but we definitely equalized. If we imagine white takes on e4 and we take back, it's not hard to imagine at some point we'll play d5, and there's absolutely no reason why white should be better. One game continued with queen c2, and now black takes the bishop. Why not? And this position here is equal. Black does not suffer any problems. So taking on c5 is not something we really fear. Bishop c3, on the other hand, is slightly clever. We cannot take on d4, as our bishop on b4 would be hanging. And if we take on c3, we're helping the white development. And suddenly we have a little problem with keeping the square d4, d6. Also, white can now play this e4 move, which he often desires. So it's slightly tricky, and we just have to think very basically. Which piece does need to come into play, and which are the important squares that need controlling? To me, it's quite obvious that these two squares are where we need most control. You could also maybe say e4 square is important. Knight e4 is possible, but it's not so obvious that the knight is well placed there. So therefore the best move is knight a6. The knight is on its way to e4, and it's controlling b4 and c5 on the way. So this is a quite simple move. Now if white plays a3, we're not shy to take, and play knight c5. Now the control over e4 and the threat against b3 gives black a perfectly fine position. It's equal here. So these kind of positions, if we're fast, we can maybe still play d5, and then we take control over e4. We don't have a hedgehog position, which might also be fine, but it's slightly inferior. But we have an improved version where we have control of more central squares. All our pieces are well played. So after knight a6 comes white's real plan, which is bishop b2. The idea is now that the bishop should be badly placed on b4, and it's an interesting strategic idea, and it's very instructive. The main points which I will present now, but it's in practice it's not very difficult for black to equalize if he knows what he needs to do. First of all, the bishop is somewhat crammed out there, so it needs space. So we take here. And if white now takes with the queen, then black plays bishop e7, and then comes knight c5. We take control over the e4 square. Maybe even if white plays b4, we go back to d7, play d6. We have a hedgehog position, but white will have to stretch himself a little bit to be well placed. On the other hand, in the ECO, this is given as the only line against this main line I'm suggesting in where black is in problems. And the idea they suggest is a3, bishop e7, and b4. Clearly playing against the knight here. And for pure positional reasons, it looks okay. White will regain the pawn on d4, and afterwards the knight on a6 will be out of play. Some games have continued with d5, knight takes d4 here. And it's really true, the knight on a6 is badly placed, and black is suffering. So we need to solve this problem, of course, before we can be able to play something like this. And it has been solved a long time ago, almost 15 years ago in a game. And it's not a very difficult problem actually for a strong player to solve if he just thinks about it in the way we just talked about. Black's only problem is the knight is badly placed on a6. It would not be better placed on c7. it wants to be on c5. So the correct move here is knight b8, which is quite impressive move. Now in this game I referred to white played knight bd2, and then black plays a5, and played b5, and now black could have played d6 and knight d7, but he chose to bring out the rook first. Rook a7, comes bishop takes d4, and now d6, and black's only problem is there might be problems with the square, but he played quite accurately. But basically the knight will come to c5, and if we have any weaknesses of pawns, it will not be the d6 pawn but the c4 pawn. So here the black will have equalized with decent play. And this is a good way to show how that there are strategic battles in these kind of positions. White can put black problems, but black can also solve them. I really think that in the Queen's Indian, these kind of positions where you have to solve such problems is the worst that can happen to you. I don't believe white can press for a real advantage. And this is basically all there is to know about this variation if white does not take on b4. If he takes on b4, it's a much more complex issue, and we'll look at this in lecture 5. First I'll just upload slightly more accurate theoretical knowledge here so you can study this in detail at your time of choosing and at your leisure. But anyway, this was all you need to know on this line, given very shortly. See you again in lecture 6.